So this is going to go out in about a week from now. We did August Darnell last week, who was terrific. I mean, the final question was, if you couldn't be August Darnell or Kid Creole, who would you like to be? And he said, good question. He said, I'd like to be a woman. So I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, women are just one rung up from Negroes in the ladder of society. And he said, I'd really like to see life from a woman's perspective, which was terrific. I mean, it was a really good interview. Going to close up now. Okay. I'm afraid it's going to get rather hot.
Okay. What are the questions?
Oh, the questions and the atmosphere, I think. How was Glastonbury?
It was quite strange. It's not something that, quite honestly, I'd like to relive. It wasn't the best of our performances, and there was some animosity from certain sectors of the crowd. From the bulk of the crowd, there wasn't. It was very successful. But it is really quite strange when you're singing to people who quite obviously do not like you, which obviously doesn't happen in events which are solely Smith's events. But when you're playing festivals where there are people there to see other groups, it's quite tricky. And that's how Glastonbury turned out for us.
Why did you do Glastonbury? Because it seemed a strange event for the Smiths to do.
Yeah, I didn't really know that much about Glastonbury, really, before we did it. And it sounded a very attractive prospect several months ago. And I'm sure for many groups it really is, but I don't think the Smiths worked at Glastonbury. I'm not exactly sure why, perhaps because we built up our following in smaller clubs, and now we've advanced to larger halls, and we were very much a live group, and it was always very intimate and very personal, which was something we couldn't capture at Glastonbury.
Do you prefer sort of one-off concerts then to touring?
Well, we played persistently for almost 14 months, and we haven't stopped at any point. So I haven't been able to sit back from that situation and say, well, what do I prefer? Because we've always just plundered on, and almost everything we've done has been incredibly successful. Out of the last year or so, we've only really had quite a few appearances that just didn't work.
Well, I'd like to talk a bit now about your background. How old are you?
I'm 25.
25, so you were then running the fan club for the New York Dolls, who spawned 1,000 punk rock bands.
Yeah.
When you were, what, 15?
Quite young, yes, 15.
How did you get involved in that?
Well, there was really nothing else to do. I was really quite dedicated to the Dolls, and I just had some degree of ambition at that age, which, I mean, people consider it to be quite young to be doing such a thing, but I never really did. It was really quite good for a while, but suddenly, one day, it's really quite strange because I was so fanatical about the Dolls to an almost unhealthy obsession, and then one day, I just simply woke up and suddenly it didn't mean a thing to me, which was quite frightening. I mean, for me now to look back upon records from a particular period, which were the sole reason why I existed, and to listen to these records today and I hear nothing, is really quite strange.
What is your background? What was your background? I mean, what did your parents do?
I come from a working class background, nothing very sensational and nothing immensely interesting. I have one older sister. We've always lived in Manchester, where I was born, and I've never really worked, and I've never really done anything remotely interesting until the Smiths. So I have really quite an uninteresting background.
What did your parents do?
My mother was a librarian, and my father worked in a hospital, not as a brain surgeon.
What did he do?
He was a porter. He is a porter.
Where, at that time, did you feel closer to your mother or your father?
I think definitely my mother. She seemed to really understand, because I wasn't really quite the conventional teenager, and many of the ideas that I had just really didn't seem to appeal to the average working class teenager. I seemed really always to be a step apart from most people, which can almost sound glamorous and very poetic, and sometimes it was, but for a large degree it wasn't. There quite bleak times. I wrestled for a while to break into journalism, and I was greeted with nothing but disinterest and failure. So that really determined me, made me more determined and more angry to do something beneficial.
What were the sort of unconventional things that you did as a teenager?
The most unconventional thing that I did was nothing. I wasn't really terribly interested in many things. I didn't go out. I had no social life. I didn't have any friends. I just really set in for years and years and years reading, which of course is quite perverse. Certainly when one lives in a working class environment, it's totally, it's an illness.
Did your parents object to your lifestyle?
I think they worried slightly. They did worry to a certain degree. But my mother was always very, very supportive to almost anything I did. I told her I didn't want to work, and she said, well, that's fine. Even at a time when we financially needed it. I told her that I wanted to go away, and she would let me. I would say I need a typewriter, and she'd buy it. She was always supportive in every possible way, when I'm sure most people would have really just slaughtered their children if they had these kind of inclinations. But she was incredibly supportive, and I think it was entirely because of her that I survived to be in the Smiths.
Did you make a conscious decision to be different?
I think, in a way, yes, but in a way that's much more important. I don't really remember making any decisions. I mean, it's just something I really plundered into. To a large degree, we really don't decide how our destinies unfold. But to a very small degree, of course I did. I did decide that I wouldn't engage in certain things, and I wouldn't swim with the tide, as it were. And these are really quite difficult things to do, and difficult decisions to make. And I always received severe opposition because I wouldn't work and such things.
What was life like at school then for you? It must have been tough.
It was quite tough. I mean, it constantly seems as though everything that I've experienced is a total nightmare, which isn't true. Yes, it was quite tough because I went to a very threadbare school, a school which it ultimately got some global attention for being the most brutal school in the country, capital punishment. You virtually didn't have to do a thing to be persistently whipped.
Did you get beaten?
For some obscure reason, I always avoided it. I always thought they considered me far too delicate to be caned. I constantly thought that they presumed that if they hit me, that I'd just disappear. But it was really quite an absurd school. And working class, the only thing that you could possibly do was woodwork. And obviously, when you left school, you would, go into a factory or something. There was no question of being artistic or of reading books or of thinking about anything specific. I remember at one point, one instance, all the pupils were asked to write about their favourite book. And I wrote about the dictionary. And I remember I was virtually expelled for being so obstreperous and perverse. So it was that kind of school. It was the kind of school that gave no scope whatsoever for individuality.
Did you have any friends among the other pupils?
I did. I must say that I did. I did seem to attract the more obscure elements of the school. The kind of person that never had any friends. The very lanky, bespectacled, spotted failure somehow was attracted to me. And I thought that was quite interesting because I was very good at athletics. And I was the type of person who could have things very easy if I really wanted to. Because in working class schools, if you're good at athletics, you're the treasured student. Everything you do is wonderful and you can get away with anything. And I was that kind of student, but I kind of backed away from the very easy attainable things. And I blended with the obscure pupils, which was much more interesting than taking the easy route.
What was your nickname at school?
Oh, I'm not telling you. It's too ridiculous. No, I'm not telling you.
What was your nickname?
I can't say. It's ridiculous. All nicknames are ridiculous, but mine was more ridiculous than anybody else's. Next question.
When did you first discover Oscar Wilde?
When I was plundering towards 10 years old, my mother was quite dedicated and she had several books. And I think she had said to me before that, look, you really have to read this, it's everything you need to know about life, and I ignored her largely. But one day I became nailed to the book, and things were never quite the same since then.
Which book was it?
It was The Complete Works of Oscar Wilde.
And what did that change for you?
Almost everything, because I always had this idea about writing and doing some constructive writing, and I always felt that in order to write you had to be completely obscure and incredibly intellectual, so intellectual that nobody could possibly ever understand what you're talking about, and use all these incredibly long words and be incredibly profound. And then I read Oscar Wilde, and he used the most basic language, and he said the most powerful things. All the words were immediately understandable and fundamental, and yet he wove such immense poetry. It occurred to me that just by saying very basic things and very real things, that here was the power of the written word, rather than just being completely ostentatious and rhetorical, whatever.
Because your heroes include Oscar Wilde, James Dean, Billy Fury.
Yes,
what do they have in common?
Something, I'm sure, but on the face of it, perhaps people think they have nothing in common. But studying their lives, I think they were all essentially doomed creatures, and although they each had immense success, their lives ended quite sadly and quite distressingly, which has a certain degree of inexplicable appeal to me. The fact that people can become public figures and almost adored by everybody, yet their lives are quite isolated in reality, and very little has any value to them. That, to me, has some strange appeal.
Do you identify with that?
To a large degree, yes, but of course I certainly don't have the fame that they had.
You wrote a book about James Dean. What made you do that? Was it commissioned, or did you just write it on?
Well, I simply had the chance to, and looking back on it, I do regret that it was quite brief. And in a way, it's almost quite hopeless, because obviously so much has been written about James Dean, and his life was so comparatively short that there's very little that can be said. Obviously, I never met him. There was virtually nothing new that I could add. But I thought by simply thrusting something out onto the market, it could regenerate some degree of interest from people who perhaps wouldn't know that much about James Dean, because at the time when I did it, all the books that had been written on James Dean were out of print. But I felt I had this incredible poetic union with James Dean, and that's why I did it.
Poetic union?
Yes, this kind of blending of souls is quite mystical and embarrassing.
Can you amplify it?
I don't know whether I can, well, or at least whether I can without sounding incredibly dramatic. I felt this enormous affinity with almost every aspect of his life, and that was the interest that I had. I never had the interest from the standpoint of a person who simply likes film and who enjoys film, even though I do. But studying James Dean's acting ability, I can see quite clearly that there are faults and there are blemishes.
What did you say about James Dean then that hadn't been said before?
Practically nothing, perhaps, but I thought by simply writing from the standpoint of somebody who was living in the late 1970s, and who simply had obviously a very detached view of James Dean, which hadn't been done before, because everybody that had written about him had some connection, perhaps had met him, or was some obscure professor immersed in the whole ideology of film and film history. I wasn't. I was just a nondescript individual living in Manchester with no money.
One of your other heroes, Sandy Shaw, you used to write fan letters to Sandy.
Yeah.
Who else did you write to?
Practically everybody, I'm afraid. No, not practically everybody, that's completely untrue. I was very interested in correspondence, and if I did like anybody, I would write to them and tell them so. I was never ashamed to slap how I felt onto paper and to rush out and buy a stamp.
Who else did you write to?
Well, I'm embarrassed. I'd rather not say. I'm sorry.
Well, there must be someone that isn't going to make you feel embarrassed.
I don't know.
Surely you're not embarrassed about
No,
writing some shit.
on this subject I feel quite vulnerable. It's probably best that I don't say. I mean, it's really almost quite bad enough to admit that I even wrote letters to anybody.
Why?
I don't know, because there's something almost clumsy about the whole thing, and vaguely pathetic. But I'm afraid I'm just a doomed fan, as it were.
Well, is it true that you spent 3 months secluded in your bedroom as a teenager?
Much more than that, I'm sure, but I do distinctly remember one period where I hardly ever left the room for a 3-month period.
What were you doing in there?
Well, that's a good question. I used to write furiously, and I was just really nailed to the typewriter, and I was swimming in paper and all kind of introspective things like that. I wasn't exactly your average teenager.
Did you want to stay there?
The alternatives weren't very glamorous. If I left the room, I'd probably end up at some obscure pub or wandering about the park, which was always quite dangerous. I really had no options. I mean, I was living the kind of life, I was unemployed for a very long time and I had no money. I was living a life to a large degree that I didn't choose, being financially absurdly embarrassed. So it really seemed to me that I would never ever settle for second best in life. That if I couldn't have exactly what I wanted, then I would have absolutely nothing. Because to me, nothing always seemed more important to me than a false something or something that I didn't really want. So therefore I stayed in. I did nothing. I just wrote, and I was determined that if I couldn't have exactly what I wanted, then I would disappear into the woodwork.
What did you write about, and what happened to all that stuff?
Most of it I later destroyed, because on reflection it always seemed so embarrassingly real and personal that it could only ever really be destroyed. But I did write lots of things that I still have. It got to the point with me where I'd simply write anything just for the sake of writing, and just kind of critical essays on certain things that nobody really cared about.
Do you like the idea, then, of living in a secret world?
Not especially, not really. I mean, if somebody said to me, would you rather be incredibly popular and have a throng of supportive friends, or would you rather be a distressed, hysterical person locked in the bedroom? I think I really would choose to be quite popular. But I don't remember choosing the way I lived.
But it seems very much like a kind of fantasy world, your teenage.
It does, but I can assure it really wasn't. But I think you can look upon almost anything and almost any existence which is quite extraordinary, and it can almost sound quite fantastic and like a fantasy. It's like the lives of very famous people can seem incredibly glamorous when slapped onto paper, but of course, for a large point, they couldn't possibly be.
Because most teenagers become obsessed with sex.
Mm.
Did you go through that period?
No, I never did. I think I brushed quite close when I was 19 and 20, but previous to that period I didn't give it a great deal of thought, and it wasn't really something that I really needed to think about, because in my life it didn't really exist. I was aware that certain things should have occurred and certain things should interest me, and I was aware of teenagers around me frolicking about and being incredibly inconsequential and free-thinking, which I never was. So that kind of period when you're just supposed to be totally reckless and you're supposed to care about nothing apart from yourself and having as much fun as possible, I'm afraid I skirted past that period quite seriously and severely. And it's something that I regret enormously now, but there's not really any point.
So you regret not sowing your wild oats, etc.?
Yes, I do. I do regret that.
In those days, did you spend any evenings fumbling in the back seats of cinemas?
Fumbling in haystacks? No, I certainly didn't. Whenever I went to cinemas, I always raced for the front seat, I'm afraid. I was that boring.
You say in other interviews that you're now celibate.
Mm.
Is that true?
Yes, I'm afraid so. I don't have a certificate, but I can only say that I am.
Is that part of the Smiths mythology? Or is
Not really, because the other three members of the group are quite the reverse. Again, this gets almost repetitious, but it was something that I initially had no say in, which sounds almost pitiful, but it really wasn't. And it's something that I got increasingly used to, and it's something that I became so aware of as the years ticked past, and I realized that I was quite solitary in this area, that suddenly I realized that it was something that I would quite perversely cling to. It became quite important to me for some reason. Suddenly it became really serious whether I got involved or not, whereas to most people it really isn't.
Was your celibacy then prompted by a bad experience?
I've had very few experiences, but they have been bad, yes, and they were a very long time ago. And it's not something that I would like to repeat it, but this gets incredibly delicate and icy, and it becomes almost difficult to talk about. But yes, I would say that it was. I did lose the very idea that any communion between two people could possibly be enjoyable. I did lose that particular thread. And I did become enormously depressed to the point where I believed that any kind of relationship was almost impossible.
Is there a fear now, then, of sex?
No, it's not a fear. I wouldn't quite say that. But something, but not fear. No,
How
not
would you
fear.
describe it?
A slightly... perhaps just too much thought, too much anticipation. Perhaps I don't really care enough.
Would anything inspire you to break your celibate state?
It's not impossible, but it's not something that I give a great deal of thought to, and I believe for it to happen, I believe that for it to happen, I would have to be of a particular mode of thinking, which I'm not. I'm of the frame of mind that it won't happen, and therefore it doesn't.
Because you've said that you want children. Who would you want to be their mother?
I don't know. Me, perhaps. I don't know. That's something that I have no answer for. Sometimes I sit down and I quite like the idea. I must admit that other times I stand up and I despise the idea. But I suppose everybody feels that their own children could almost be models of themselves and therefore be completely acceptable. But when we gaze at other children, we're quite frightened, I should imagine. I do like the idea, but I realise that now over the years I've become uncommonly selfish.
There are, in some of your songs, lyrics that pertain to heterosexual rejection and homosexual isolation. That was quoted in this week's Rolling Stone.
Yes.
Is that the way you feel? Isolated?
I do, yes, but it's an isolation that is, it sounds laughable, but almost genderless, because I don't have any, I don't speak from a very strict heterosexist angle. I cannot segregate the sexes. I cannot see women over there and men over there, and this large chasm between the two.
Where do you place yourself?
In the middle somewhere, straddling, I'm afraid, but I feel that this way, that in popular music at least, by now there should be a voice which kind of speaks for everybody, but doesn't say things in a way that is so neutral that it is absolutely non-sexual. I do like to speak for both the sexes because I feel that the difference between them is incredibly slim.
But you once said that being a sex symbol was the best thing to be.
But that was at a time when I thought that it could possibly never happen, and to a small degree it has happened.
So do you consider yourself a sex symbol?
Well, other people do seem to, so therefore in a way I suppose I must be. Oh, I keep them all. I reply to them, take their phone numbers, etc. No, I don't.
You're being slightly flippant.
Yes, I'm being unnecessarily flippant.
But how does it feel to be a sex symbol, given what you've just said?
Well, I get these letters and I read them and I say, and then we appear on stage and girls scream and, you know, they want to touch me, and I kind of look at them and I read these letters and I look at the whole thing and I say, well, yes, it's very interesting, but I do feel slightly detached from it.
Do you feel contempt?
No, I don't feel any degree of contempt, but I feel that, well, yes, they're screaming and they're writing these letters, but they're not really addressed to me. It's just an accident that they happen to land through my letterbox. Because it's quite difficult at times to, the way I live and the way I think about things, and then to kind of really see the way other people see me, and to associate with this person that, who should receive these letters. This kind of sexual person, this desirable person. It's not really me.
So they're writing to someone else?
Yeah, I do feel that. Wrongly, I suppose.
You had a Catholic upbringing.
Mm.
What kind of influence did that have on you? I mean, are you religious now?
No, I'm not. It had quite a detrimental influence on me. I went to stern working-class Catholic schools, which were very depressing and very repressive, and I never liked this. And it always seemed to me entirely wrong to inflict all these kind of foul, ugly images onto children. These images of serpents trampled underfoot with the fire coming out of their nostrils and things like that, or whatever. And this constant belief at school that if you don't go to church, it's a cardinal sin and you shall burn in hell and God will strike you down. This constant fear of whatever you do, you're wrong, and whatever you do, you're guilty. And just simply by reason of your existence, you are absolutely guilty in every way. I despised that. I often felt that Christianity and the Catholic Church were quite severely divided. And I also looked upon Ireland, being the most Catholic country in the world, as being also the most repressed country in the world. It seemed to me wrong, it seemed to me black, because it didn't allow any degree of self-expression. It didn't allow any scope for individuality in any direction. This constantly carrying this thing on one's shoulder.
Do you have then the traditional sort of Catholic guilt complex now?
No, I don't. I mean, all of that is just really candy floss. I never paid any attention to that whatsoever.
Could you see yourself ever returning to Catholicism?
No, because when people do, it always seems to be for very negative reasons. People get afraid. They realize that time is passing by, or they do feel this extreme guilt. People never really flock to the church for some very positive reason, which worries me slightly.
Do you not think that, there will come a time in your life when you will return to it?
I can't see it. I really can't. But who can tell?
I'd like to talk a bit about your image.
Mm.
How contrived is your public image?
It's not in the least bit contrived, but when you fall into the public eye, it seems to me that regardless of what you do or what you wear or what you say, it is construed as an image. I mean, you can wear no clothes at all and that will be seen as an image. So it's really quite inescapable, the whole thing. So there's no answer to that. One comes under the searchlights, the scorching searchlights, and everything that you do is an image.
Yes, I mean, walking around with foliage coming out your back pocket could be construed as being an image, could it not?
Possibly, yes.
Why do you do that?
I can see that. For quite delicate reasons. Severe interest I had in nature and being close to nature, which is something that Oscar Wilde felt, and I always thought was quite passionate and quite amusing. The idea of constantly carrying flowers, or of being simply immersed in leaves. I quite liked that. It was quite poetic. But the way it happens to me in relation to the Smiths, I do get quite depressed that many detractors focus upon that and not the music. And I do see quite clearly when people want to criticize the Smiths, the only thing that they can talk about is the flowers, and that it's absurd, and that it's... I mean, I realized that I was voted Wally of the Year the other day in some disreputable magazine simply for that sole reason.
But you have set yourself up for that, haven't you?
No, I don't. No, really, I don't believe that I have. I mean, to me, it's just really not that crucial. There are other things to talk about, and if people just see me as this strange character whirling flowers about or whatever, then it simply reflects upon the shallowness of the observer.
Well, that is how a lot of the public see you. I think a lot of people would say that your image is sort of rather wet, really.
They do. Some people do. I would say that more people don't. I think that people see me as being quite delicate, which in the world of popular music and rock and roll, if you like, is anathema. It is the worst thing to be delicate and not to be this big macho whatever. So therefore, since flowers and any kind of nature is just connected with total whimpery, to some degree I fall into that bracket. But I think I have other things that help me scramble out of the pit.
Like what?
Well, the words that I write, which is principally why I'm here. I mean, I'm not here to dissect insects or do anything like that. I'm here principally because I write.
Well, one of the lyrics, some of the lyrics you've written in Heaven Knows I'm Miserable Now. Why do I spend my time talking to people I'd rather kick in the eye? Who would you like to kick in the eye?
Well, on the very brief spasms of employment that I had in the past, it always seemed to me there were moments of the day when I would realize that I was here working with these people that I despise, and I have to talk to these horrible people and ask them what they did yesterday, and I would have to report to a boss that I couldn't stand. And when you're in that position, which was the absolute basis of Heaven Knows I'm Miserable Now, you realize that you're actually spending your entire life living with people that you do not like, and doing something that you do not like, which is incredibly distressing. So that was the basis of that song. I mean, kick in the eye. Yes, literally, sometimes, I mean, let's be perfectly honest, sometimes we do get so angry with people that we're not averse to violence, which, of course, is a terrible thing to say, but truth nonetheless.
Would Oscar Wilde have approved?
Probably. I think he would.
But being in the music business, you come across a lot of people in record companies, promotions companies, whatever, who I think would rub you up the wrong way. Have you found that there's been a higher incidence of you wanting to kick people in the eye in the music business?
An uncommonly high one. Most of the people that I come across in the whole industry that I have no real desire to form any friendships with, which is quite unsettling. But I still feel quite angry about most things, and I still feel on the outside, even though we've had some degree of success, national success, it doesn't really change the way you feel about life, which is quite surprising to me, because for some naive reason I thought that it would. But, I mean, the music industry is just like anything else in life. Nobody loves everybody. I mean, there are very, very few people in each individual's life that we adore. There's very few people that we really like.
Do you have many friends?
No, I don't.
Those that you have, are they in the music industry?
They're in the group. They're in the Smiths.
So the Smiths are your only friend?
As far as I can see, yes.
Does that sadden you?
It does, but it's something that isn't new to me. I've lived with it for quite a long time, so I don't really mind. I don't mind because in the Smiths and with the Smiths, to some degree, I'm getting exactly what I want, so it doesn't really matter.
Which is?
I'm writing, and people are paying some degree of attention, and for me that's everything. I mean, there's nothing worse than writing and letting everything just rot in the bottom drawer. It's really quite important, I'm afraid, to get some kind of approval and to have your words splattered about the country. And doing that, as I am, it's the highest degree of satisfaction, and there's nothing else.
You like the approval?
Yes, I do.
Because the NME has really created you. I mean, they gave you a big push.
They did. They weren't the first paper to write about us, and they weren't the first people to help us, but they were certainly incredibly supportive at the beginning of the year. Things have changed slightly now with all the music press. There is, I do get the advanced chill of a backlash, and it's bang on time, and it's really quite expected.
You ready for it?
Yes, largely. I mean, I think that we are quite indestructible in many ways. But I'm not saying that I'm terribly happy about it. I'm not happy when I read reviews in the music press. For instance, quite recently we played Belfast, 2,500 sellout concert, and it was really quite hysterical, quite wonderful. We did 4 encores and everybody was enormously receptive. And then I read this review in the Melody Maker, which implies that the whole thing was entirely damp, entirely forgettable, and nobody cared. And then I read a review in the NME by a person called Anne McRae, who reviews the concert in Sheffield and doesn't mention the event in any vague detail, simply analyses my character and destroys it. But it does seem quite hateful and quite destructive, and I don't understand it completely. But ultimately, I'm above it, so it doesn't really matter.
Why are you above it?
Because as the day ends, one is still alone with in my instance, the words that I want to write and the things that I want to say. And in that area, I'm completely untouchable. Nobody will shove me off course, and nobody will make me believe that what I've done is wrong, or what I've written is wrong, or that the person that I am is a totally nonsensical character.
But if you're looking for approval, who are you looking for approval from? The media or the fans?
Well, I do read the music press, so it's very nice to have media approval, but it doesn't determine the way I write. I'll never sit down and say, well, I really have to do this because otherwise such a paper won't like me very much. That doesn't happen. But it is very good to get the support of the music press. I can't deny that.
Well, who do you think is the typical Morrissey fan? I mean, do you think they're all lonely sixth formers?
No, I don't feel that. I'm sure a great deal of them are, but I look at our present audience, and it has changed a great deal. We've been the first group on an independent label to gain not only an independent audience, but also a major audience. Nobody else has done that on an independent label, and I'm quite pleased about that. I look at our audience, and I see the people who were there initially, the kind of severe, serious musicologists, and I realize now that we are attracting lots of very young people, and that becomes dangerous because I believe that the media do always judge you on your audience. They judge you entirely upon the people who come to see you, regardless of what exactly you're doing on the stage. But I see our audience as being incredibly vast. There are lots of people from all walks of life. We're not regimented to a certain sect of people. We're no longer regimented to this serious musicologists or teenies or whatever. It just seems to be everybody.
But given this, you have a very sort of miserable image. Are you the kind of Leonard Cohen who was the doomy singer-songwriter of the 60s? Are
No.
you the Leonard Cohen of the 80s?
No, I don't think so. I can't see that in any way. And I don't feel morbid, and I don't feel depressive, because I thought it was quite important to say things that were quite serious and quite open, in a way that in the past had been considered to be quite depressing, but to say them in a way that by reason of them being aired was really quite positive. There is something quite positive in saying, in being very open with the people around you and saying, well, look, this is exactly how I feel, because then you get over those barriers, and it really isn't done that often. And I do feel there is a twinge of humour in the way that I write, and if that isn't absolutely apparent, then to a degree I understand it, but I do try to inject it. I don't want to be considered morbid by any degree.
Why the band called The Smiths?
Because the name, it occurred to me that the name nobody could put any possible connotations on the name, and I really liked that, because it came at a time when group names were vastly important, were biblical, were monstrous, had a great deal to say, were very long, and were in themselves a lifestyle. I wanted to get rid of all that kind of rhetorical dribble and just say something incredibly basic. And Smith to me sounded quite down to earth.
Hey, you're a vegetarian. That must pose problems for you on the road with the other Smiths.
Yeah.
Because apparently they're into sort of booze, birds and burgers.
All at once.
Not
Yes.
necessarily.
Well, yes. Yes, it is a great problem.
If they're your only friends, that must create problems.
It is, and they know how I feel, but I don't stand on the table and say you can't possibly eat that piece of meat and go into a long monologue about the piece of meat. I don't do that. I don't try and inflict the way I feel upon other people, because that's quite boring. And people know what meat is, and people know how the leg of lamb comes onto the table. And they don't want to be reminded, frankly.
So are you keener, are they keener on the sort of rock and roll lifestyle more than you are?
If I said yes, that would sound quite ungenerous and almost like a slur. It'd make them out to be just incurable heavy metal addicts, which they're certainly not. They're quite sensitive people, but they are quite more traditional musicians than I am.
So do they party a lot? Yeah.
Yes, as often as they can.
So, if they are your only friends, what do you have in common?
Well, it does take a great deal to make the music. For strangers cannot simply huddle together and do what we do. And therefore there has to be some kind of mystical communion between us and some bond. And there is, and as time goes by it gets stronger. And whatever happens with the record companies or with the music industry doesn't really have any effect on us. We just really want to stay together as four individuals and make records. That's the only ambition that we have.
You have no ambitions beyond music?
Not the traditional ambitions within music. We don't have them. I mean, going to Yugoslavia, to America, touring the world, that doesn't appeal to us in any small degree. We can't kind of jump into the rock and roll treadmill.
So how are you going to survive then if you don't conform to that? I mean, purely from a financial point of view.
It's possible. I wouldn't say that it was incredibly easy, but I'm sure it is possible. And for me, just to make records that get some vague degree of attention is all that I really require.
Do you have no other ambition?
There are things that I'd like to do, but I feel that what I'm doing now has to be done now. I do want to write, but that can wait. There won't always be a time when I can do this.
Well, what would you like to be doing in, say, 5 or 10 years' time?
I do want to write. I still do write, but I would like to be successful in that area.
And what would you like to write? Books, plays?
Yes, I would. I'd like to write. I'm very interested in there's a particular screenplay that I'm blustering through at the moment. But to talk about these things seems incredibly pompous and ostentatious, and it almost sounds entirely careerist. I want to do everything. I'm going to sing in this group, and I'm going to write a screenplay, and I'm going to make a film. But I do have other ambitions, which I'm sure in this business, well, in many cases, one thing tends to lead to another.
Well, we're in Bath, in the secluded English countryside, talking to Johnny Marr from the Smiths. How are you, Johnny?
Well, thanks.
What are you doing here in Bath?
We're doing the new LP. We're sort of midway through it now. We've got a couple more weeks to go on it. And it's going well. We're working hard. We've been here about 4 weeks. The LP's called Strange Ways Here We Come. It should be finished in 2 weeks, as I say.
Does it mark any kind of new direction for the Smiths?
Yeah, I think it does, yeah.
In what way?
Well, the writing since the last LP has changed towards a sort of slightly harder kind of feel. And I use less guitars on the tracks, but sort of bigger sounding guitars rather than using things sort of interwoven. And because I've written the music that in this particular sort of hard hitting way is pretty a lot more direct. It's not an intentional massive departure, because we like pretty much the way we sound anyway. It's we've only been together a few years, and we don't feel under any massive pressure to change with each LP, because we pretty much like the sound that we've got, you know. Instrumentation-wise, there's this album's a little bit more varied because I've been playing a little bit more keyboards, pianos and organs and things. But the songs are still miserable rock songs, thank God, which I'm really pleased about. So there's no sort of massive change. There isn't any sort of happy talks on this LP or anything. It's still pretty serious music.
Are you a serious person?
Me?
Hmm.
Oh yeah. What do you think?
In what way do you think the songwriting has progressed over the past few years for you?
Well, in the past, I kind of enjoyed. I'm trying to not make too little of some of the past songs, but I did kind of enjoy the idea of some disposability in pop music. Just from my side of it, from the musical side of things, and I like the idea of short, snappy, to the point pop songs. I still like songs to be quite to the point, and I do tend to like songs to say what they're going to say in 2.5 minutes. But having said that, I've tried to write with it a bit more sort of emotionally, rather than wanting to hear a great condensed pop song. Say a la This Charming Man. The music's a little bit more serious now. I mean, it's not quite conceptual, but it's I'm trying to write with a little bit more sort of feeling, you know, rather than come up with a riff or come up with a tune that's a great pop tune. I've sort of discarded a lot of things because they didn't really have enough intensity one way or the other. You know, I'm getting away from things sounding pleasant and melodic as they did sound in the past. I'm trying to sound a little bit more discordant, guitar-wise and keyboards-wise anyway.
It seems that you're becoming more of the focus of the Smiths than perhaps Morrissey was, seeing as Morrissey doesn't seem to be having quite as high a profile. Are you happy to sort of take on that role as being a bit more of a front man?
Well, if this is happening, I don't know why it is. It's just an accidental thing. No, and to answer the question, I'm not really happy to take on the role of frontman. I don't think I am. I think Morrissey's the frontman. And if people want an angle on the co-writer or the guitarist or however people see me, then that's fair enough. But I'm not the Smiths frontman. I formed the group, but I'm not the frontman.
It seems you're very prolific. I mean, hardly, a couple of months goes by without something new coming out.
Well, I try not to think. I mean, people do mention that to us, but I try not to accept it too much, because if it's prolific by other people's standards, then that's their tough luck, really. If people only write 10 songs a year, I mean, I think that's basically it. I'm starting to see that people expect us to be in the norm, which is what, 10 songs a year, 4 singles off that LP, which is never it's never the way we've done things. I don't regard ourselves as particularly prolific by our own standards, because it's what we've always done. It's what I do. I write. I don't think there's anything sort of particularly amazing about being able to write however many songs we write a year, 20, 25 songs. And apparently since The Queen Is Dead, I'm not sure, but since The Queen Is Dead LP in this country, we've actually released sort of on record 12 songs, and we haven't even had the second LP, the following LP out. So by everybody else's standards, I suppose that's quite prolific. In between one LP and another, because of singles and B-sides and extra tracks, we release a lot of new songs. But I don't think we're prolific, no.
Do you find it easy to write?
Yeah. That's why I don't think we're prolific. That's what I do.
Do you have to be in a certain kind of mood to write?
No, not really, no. I mean, to get back to what I was saying before, that's why, I mean, I can always write and find an angle of writing a song every day. But with this LP, even though it's been just as natural for me to write stuff, I have tried to write with a bit more sort of direct kind of emotion. I mean, that's to say some of the songs are quite brutal. Not in the sense that some of the old songs like Miserable Lie or What She Said, which were quite stompy and thrashy, are quite brutal in a sort of in a melodic sense. Trying to get a little bit more discordant, and because I think probably as a fan and as a listener of music, I'm just really bored of commerciality. In a word, commerciality. You know, at the moment it seems to be really safe, and commerciality seems to mean non-progression and blandness. Whereas when we first started, we felt like commerciality was something that was really, really good and something not to be sneered on. And I think we proved that we could merge both sort of interesting ideas with an accessible sound with the old songs. But I'm getting less and less interested in that. Maybe it might be to the detriment of our record sales, but it's no good just churning out songs that are going to appear on the charts. I mean, I'd rather sort of sell much less records and make much more interesting music. Probably all musicians would probably claim the same, but whether they actually do it or not is debatable.
When Panic came out, a lot of radio people were fairly shocked, the hang the DJ line.
Yeah.
Do you enjoy upsetting people?
I do when we agree with the principle and they disagree with the principle, when there's a certain principle at stake. Yeah, I don't agree with controversy just for controversy's sake. I mean, I think everybody can see through that, and everybody can spot a fake a mile away. That's why we can do things such as a radical statement like "Hand the DJ" in a single, and it can be successful because it wasn't just as with all the lyrics. It's no sort of quick stab at controversy. And to be honest, and probably naively, we just made the record and decided it'd be a good single and put it out. And the label said, "Well, do you expect this to be played?" And it was around, when we first came out, and we suddenly realised that maybe it might not be. I mean, it's probably massive naivety, but it's all sort of fun. It's only music,
Is playing live, something of a release for you, or is it more sort of a necessary chore that you have to do?
No, it's a necessary joy. I could never really see it as a chore. The touring bits and ups and downs they're a chore, but playing live isn't a chore ever. It's always a real joy, and we're fairly typical in that we want to make each tour and each show specifically, but each sort of tour better than the last one, and we want to be a more exciting live group. And we've always had a really amazing kind of bond with the audience, which again, most musicians probably would like to claim, but probably in their hearts know that they don't have it. I mean, I go to all sorts of gigs. I like to go and see shows, and it's something that I've noticed since going out to see the Raps that they don't have that we have. It's almost like a football match. Everybody's really kind of gregarious and outrageous, and people don't just stand there taking us as seriously as people might expect. So we absolutely, it really is like a party, I mean, we're not just, we're not the faces, but being out in front of the audience, it is like a party.
Are you cocooned much when you go abroad, or do you get a chance to actually get out and see any of the countries?
In the past we have been, we have been pretty much cocooned out of our own choice. We didn't really want to do much, but I've fixed that because I go away occasionally on my own, and that way I get to do it. I mean, we haven't been to Europe for a long time as the group, even though I've been myself. And last time we were in the States was about a year ago, and we were pretty cocooned there because the tour there wasn't really much time to do anything. There was probably about a week off when we went and hung out, but we didn't really get around to lig around much. So I've tried to do that, just nip off with my wife and do it myself, really.
You mentioned Europe in there. I mean, you're pretty popular in Europe.
Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
And yet, it's very difficult for a non-English speaking person to perhaps appreciate the subtleties in the lyrics. I mean, why do you think that is, that Europe's cottoned on to the Smiths when they're sort of a very English band?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's especially puzzling because of the importance of the lyrics, and because, they literally are much more important than the average rock lyric. And I think the language, the actual language barrier is transcended by our appeal, our image, and the principles that the group sort of own, that we stand behind. I mean, I know what you're saying, that, for instance, there's tons of French kids they absolutely adore the Smiths who can't speak a word of English. I still think they know what we're about. I really do. I mean, obviously, you know, if they're Smiths fans, then they find out what the lyrics mean. But as far as initial attraction, we don't. To a European kid, we look quite different, and we are quite different. Our sort of our philosophies are pretty different to the norm in rock and roll. But we still do have a sort of well, we do have a rock and roll appeal in Europe that certainly the French and the Italians and the Germans find really appealing. I mean, those countries are always massive. They're always going to be there's always going to be a massive market for American and English rock and roll. There's people like Johnny Holiday, you know, in France, who's still making like disco records now, high energy records. His whole career's just been France, and he's been massive there, and it's because he's got a massive spirit of rock and roll. They love all that, the Europeans, which is why I like it. It's my kind of thing. You know, the people like Johnny Thunders and the Doles and the Stones and Iggy and all these sort of veterans of rock and roll they really, really like. And I think that they can see some of that in us, but still there's a completely new angle. And to give all credit to Morrissey, really, that's Morrissey's side of things. I mean, he really does bring in that the new totally un-rock and roll angle to the rock and roll group.
You've mentioned the words like doctrine and philosophy a couple of times. Is there like a Smiths manifesto?
Our doctrine is that all the naff and the hideous things that have happened as a consequence of rock and roll and all the things that are supposed to be accepted within this music business, we don't want to involve that in the group at all. You know, limos are okay, I suppose, now and again. Long hair, drugs, baggy trousers, drum solos, concept LPs, the normal things that are just current rock and roll that people take for granted, that are hideous. Instrumental mixes on B-sides of singles, ridiculous tours, massive crappy venues, bad merchandising to the audience, all these kind of really horrible old stale things that mean nothing to young people in the 80s, in any country, you know, in East or West or anything, you know. No one really gives a shit about leather trousers anymore, except, you know, people who are trying to, you know, people who hung up on Velvet Underground LPs and stuff. That's all very boring. You know, it's sort of come to a head over the last few years in this country with groups sort of just playing out this kind of rock and roll facade. And I mean, we're completely different, you know, completely different.
How were you affected by punk?
Oh, unfortunately, I was just sort of born a little bit too late, because it happened at the time when I was really starting to take my playing seriously. And just as I was learning how to play all these intricate patterns and chords and everything, the norm, you know, all these kids came out playing trash, and so initially I missed the point and the beauty of it, really, because I was personally just getting into actually being able to play, and the whole idea was not being able to play. But you know, after a year or so, I found things that really, really interested me in the punk movement. I mean, there was a lot of good things out of it, most notably Patti Smith. And Stooges, groups like that. I mean, I was one of those people who didn't get into the Stooges until punk. You know, I don't claim to have liked the Stooges in 1973, mainly because I was only 10, you know.
The Smiths are very successful here in the UK. With this next album, are you consciously sort of aiming for like a wider success, say in America or anything like that?
Not consciously, no, not with this album, because we wanted to do that with the first LP. We consciously did it from the start. We wanted to be worldwidely big, and we've always tried to do what it appears we're doing now. That's trying to make a bigger chart impression in America and in Australia and in Japan and places that we've been too busy to visit and too busy to work on.
What do you like about America?
I like the music, and I like the people. I like the history. Short as many people think it is. I think America's really a fascinating place. And I think the bad negative things about it, which everybody can get to see when they go, are equally as fascinating. And I like it because it's much less self-conscious and even though obviously politically it's in a mess, and probably even a mess on a bigger scale than most other countries, put it that way. But at least I think this positive kind of spirit of just musicians in America is something that's really attractive and something that's missing in a hideous way from this country. And I mean, I'm not talking about, obviously, Reaganomics is, or the kind of ridiculous propaganda that's, the born in the USA kind of conservatism. I'm not talking about it in a political sense. Now, obviously, I think that stinks, but it's much more inspiring than living in this country at the moment, anyway.
How important do you think the Smiths' image is? Is it important to you?
Oh, yeah. Not in the sense of, the way we have our haircut or the clothes we wear. Not image in that sense, just that, again, our image, I think, encompasses that whole kind of manifesto thing and doctrine. And I think our image is crucially important. You just take a look at the new LP. I mean, I think the World Won't Listen's a really, really good, strong LP sleeve. I think it's one of the strongest for a long time, as was the Elvis Presley Shoplifter sleeve. But the World Won't Listen sleeve, I think, is really, really good because our audience, people who want to buy the record, they buy it, and the sleeve is trying to sort of depict them, really. I mean, not that we regard all our audience as all wearing leather jackets and having either bouffants or quiffs or anything. It's much more important than that. It's just we do try and identify ourselves to our audience as young and living in the 80s. I mean, we are young and we do live very much in the 80s. That's why we don't want to be painted as just a rock and roll band with all the traditions of the other rock and roll groups, because there's something special and extra that you need in the 80s that audience require from the group. I wouldn't want to go out, if I was in a group, I wouldn't want to go out and see a group and just see them come on and do the old leather pants strip or the light strip and the backdrop and the usual kind of palaver. I mean, our image is that we try to portray that we live in the real world.
So once the album's finished, what's the plan for the rest of 1987?
People obviously want us to say we're going to tour, even the labels and stuff. But we're not going to be touring England, though. We're not going to be touring Australia. I mean, maybe we'll just do some European gigs, and maybe we'll do some American gigs. But we'll only have time to do that, and that alone if we want to stick to what we really want to do, and that's make some more records this year.
So, are you still enjoying yourself as much as when you first started?
Oh yeah, I am. I'm enjoying it more so now. The last sort of few months I've been enjoying it more so than I have for ages, yeah. Yeah, I really am enjoying it. It's great. Because we're doing what has always been the most enjoyable. Right now, you caught me at a good time because we're doing what's always been the most enjoyable thing for us to do. When we're making an LP, it's great, and it's brilliant when we're in this position. We're making an LP because we always do feel exactly the same way. So to hell with whether we've got a single on this LP. I mean, we've never been the sort of group who, when we put down the tracks for the LP, go, where's the single? The single's either there, and if it isn't there, then so what, And we're on a really kind of anarchistic high about this record. We're trying to make it as uncommercial and as unaccessible as is possible within the Smiths. I mean, we're not SPK, but we're trying to not sort of be safe. I don't think we'll ever be safe.
This album's probably one of the most poetic and certainly musically one of the most beautiful you've done. Are you pleased with it?
I'm very pleased. I feel that it really perfects everything that's been slightly attempted in the past. And I feel it's the absolutely most whole Smiths record.
There's an interesting thing about it is there's an awful lot lyrically in it that's about loving and losing, which you haven't really touched on before. Why is that? Has something in your life changed?
Well, It really hasn't, to be quite honest. No, I really still feel, and I will admit that the themes are still more or less within me the same. They haven't really changed. Nothing incredible has happened at all. So, but once again, as musically, I think it perfects everything that's been touched upon. I think lyrically, I've got a lot better, really.
If it's musically perfect, does that worry you then about what you go on to next?
No, I don't worry about it, but I can recognise the fact that within the future there has to be some slight, something new, I think. There has to be a slight change, but nothing dramatic, nothing drastic.
How does Donny Marr feel about it? Does he feel the same as you do, that he's reached the zenith?
Well, yes. I mean, it can almost sound like exhausting, one's dimensions or the capabilities of a particular viewpoint, which can sound quite negative, but it isn't. It's a positive thing, I think. We've made quite a lot of records. That's what really it says to me.
So one of the interesting tracks, Paint a Vulgar Picture, is the most sort of damning view of the music business I've ever heard.
Yeah.
Now, you obviously have to operate within that music business, so how do you cope with the two ideals?
It's very hard because if you have very strong opinions about the music industry, as most performers do not, it's very, very difficult, especially when, with interviews, one gets the chance to air these opinions. And I think that really, if you have views which are considered quite strong, they're instantly considered quite negative. Because I think the music industry gets very, very, is very impatient with people who have viewpoints, because it's all a very nice organised pattern, and it's a nice little bubble, and it works really well, and it employs lots of people. So therefore, if you become to suggest change, well, I think you're quite quickly swept away. Not many people have ever tried it, I might add, as you know. But if the suggestion of change is there.
Do you think it's possible to change the nature of the music business? I mean, it doesn't seem to be.
I think it's possible to change it in small ways, and it takes a very long time. But overall, in the most important and most effective ways, I don't think it is at all. I think the people who control the music industry are very strong.
In a way,
and also, an important point is that groups very rarely tend to band together. It's artists are very isolated, and there's no real strong. For instance, I find it very hard to believe in a movement of groups, for instance, or a movement of artists.
Is that because they're in competition with each other?
Yes, and everybody's scrambling, and everybody seems to want to be liked.
Don't you want to be liked?
Yes, I do, but not really at any price. Not at any price.
Is it important then that you're liked just by the people who buy your records, or by everybody? I mean, is there a secret Morrissey in there wants to be loved?
I think it's important, as with everybody, I presume, in daily life, to be liked for the right reasons, I expect.
Because another of your tracks, Last Night I Dreamt That Somebody Loved Me, I mean, that's a very moving little song, a very sort of heart-rending one. Is that you? I mean, are you writing for this?
It's me, yes, it is me. And sometimes most of the time I feel that although the Smiths are quite enormously popular, those records will never be played, those songs will never be heard. And I realised that, I think, when Meat Is Murder entered the chart at #1, and the title track was never ever played anywhere. I thought that was quite peculiar. And also The Queen Is Dead entered at #2. And I never heard any of those songs ever on the radio, whether it be nighttime or daytime. Well,
I played it.
Yes, actually, Muriel, I heard it when you played it. And you said lots of very nice things about it. I was actually in on that night.
Well, being loved's a funny thing, especially if you're in the music business, though, because to get back to the point of changing things in the music business, a lot of bands previously have always tried to go for social reform and radical change, but in a way they've been caught up in the system themselves.
Yeah.
Do you feel that by criticising things, in a way you're falling into the same trap? You can criticise the music business, but you're part of it. Do you feel that that's a difficult thing to get over?
Well, people find it hard to believe that I really don't feel part of it, but I really, really don't. I don't really feel part of the big whirlpool of the music industry. I don't feel that at all. I never have. And I think perhaps in order to feel a part of it, you really have to go through the usual the party ritual and such things. Being part of that whole big nonsensical pop.
Ligging, going out and
yes,
bopping.
ligging and bopping and being seen and patting other people on the back unnecessarily. I could never do that. There have been so many opportunities over the last few years for the Smiths to make their life so much easier.
Like what?
Just really by simply being totally agreeable with everybody.
And are you disagreeable?
Yes.
In what
very
way?
disagreeable. I find it very hard just to simply slide into the typical role of being a successful pop star. I mean, even for me to say those words is quite unusual. It's quite awkward for me to say them. And for the first time quite recently we went to Italy and we were doing several television shows with lots of famous people like Spano Ballet, Curiosity Kill the Cat, and a lot of famous people. And we were all together for 4 days. And it was the first time I'd ever been in that situation before because I've not really met many performers, stars or whatever. And I found it very intriguing because I found them all quite nice, but it was really very evident to me that there is this very, very strong network, and there's this very strong mode of behaviour. And I realised even more so on inspecting that, just how far away I was from it.
Did they recognise it?
I think they did, but they were very nice to me. Very, very nice to me. I don't know why.
No reason they shouldn't be.
Fools, really.
But somebody said, in fact, I think Alexei Sale said that he's noticed that celebrities who consider themselves equal status tend to hang about together. For instance, you wouldn't get Curiosity Kill the Cat hanging around with the Stones, but you'd get the Stones and Bowie hanging around together.
Yes.
So are there no contemporaries of you that sort of attempt to get your friendship because of that?
Yes, there are one or two people, but I don't think it's really, perhaps simply because we are of the same generation, musical generation. Yes, there are, I can't deny there are one or two people, such as Pete Burns, Lloyd Cole. So, yes, I can't really deny that at all.
But talking about the album lyrically again, another thing that's unusual is you've been writing about girls in it more. You don't normally write about girls. Why have you suddenly noticed them?
I haven't really just suddenly noticed them. I'm short-sighted, but no, it's really because initially I suffered this great delusion that by writing words which were theoretically genderless at any rate, that I was actually therefore speaking for everybody. But a lot of people were pointing out to me, well, this isn't really happening at all, you're completely deluding yourself, you know, women don't exist in your world at all, which wasn't true. So I think I felt over the last 12 months a need to be a little bit more demonstrative where, you know, citing gender was concerned.
So you're doing it in a tokenist way then, just mention the girlies.
No, you missed the point. I've always done it, but I feel that it has to be a little bit more slightly simplified, and you have to actually use the word her instead of
and imply it. Well, I mean, you make no secret about the fact that you're celibate. So are all these lyrics imaginary then? Are they imaginary loves?
Not really. I mean, I don't think I've really mentioned sex anywhere. So,
but it's still implied very much. I mean,
the implication, really. Well, yes, there's an implication.
The spiritual love you're talking about then?
Quite largely, yes. In fact, completely, yes. Completely spiritual love.
And is it imaginary or are they true?
Oh, it's true, yes. Yes, it is true. I mean, I do know people.
But do you have a rough time, even, you know, in the spiritual sense of loving people? I mean, have you had a life that's full of disappointment?
Yes, I've had a dreadful life. It's been awful from start to finish. Well, in some ways, yes, I think it has. It might have been slightly over-documented in the past, I think, but it's there nonetheless. But I do see people and I know people, and but I can't deny that I do generally find relationships quite blunderously awful.
Is that your fault?
Yes.
So because you choose the wrong person or that you're not capable of holding down a relationship?
No, it doesn't be real. That might be your problem. No, it isn't. It isn't that at all. It's something else. No, really, it's... I don't think in fact, I absolutely have never really had a fulfilling relationship, which is not something that I intend to state as some great dramatic revelation. But it's true nonetheless. I haven't really, which has gave me a particular viewpoint on relationships, which I suppose isn't really very common.
And yet, it doesn't seem to have made you bitter.
Oh, it has.
Has it?
Yes.
When you're well known for being critical, do you find that it wounds you very deeply when people do the same to you? Can you take criticism?
Sometimes criticism is quite useful, and just because it's negative, really, it doesn't mean that it's wrong and people have warped viewpoints. So sometimes I quite welcome it, because sometimes I sit back and say, well, yes, that's absolutely true. I am really a very silly person. So, no, sometimes I welcome it. But sometimes when I know it's just somebody who dislikes me for completely unknown reasons, I don't really accept it. I tend to stamp about and, you know, phone up the lawyers and things like that and smash milk bottles.
Well, do you have a compassionate imagination then when you speak out about someone perhaps you haven't met? Like, I don't know if you did, when you spoke out about Bob Geldof, did you worry that he would phone lawyers and stamp about and break milk bottles? Did you think you'd hurt him?
I didn't think so at the time, because I thought that he was far too busy in this great big world of, you know, Live Aid, that he wouldn't really pay any attention to my viewpoints, which were repeated so often throughout quite a long period that suddenly it seemed like I was starting some kind of a movement, which wasn't really the case. And I later heard that he even, a few months ago, he was approaching a mutual friend and quite distressed and saying, why does Marcy have this viewpoint, and so on. Which I don't think at the time I really meant the whole thing to become like the rock upon which I stand, but it tended to, and it became a recurring theme in so many interviews I did. I didn't really care that much about the whole event to really prolong the viewpoints.
Even people like royalty can be hurt personally, or do you think they're miles above that, or perhaps too stupid?
I think it's a mixture of all of those things, most definitely. I think they're too far gone to really pay any attention. When you consider the world they're born into, I don't even think they're aware of very light criticism, not really. I suppose when it's about a person's personal facial features, perhaps, it can be quite stingy, really. But generally, I think, no, I don't think it's not the world they live in. I don't believe that.
How would it hurt you if the Smiths, let's say, hypothetically, that your album wasn't as big a success as you wanted it to be, especially when you think it's reached a particular height? Mm. Would that devastate you, or would you still be aware of the fact that you were doing something that was correct?
Well, it would devastate me, but I would really feel that it was a miscalculation on other people's part, because I'm severely critical of what the Smiths do. I'm more critical than practically anybody. It's not really as if I just bang this constant drum of total musical self-assurance and simply imply that this is the right road and every other road is the road to hell. I'm not like that at all. I'm generally the first person to say, well, it's not really very good, despite what we're saying, because it's so easy for groups, once they become successful, to actually get carried on and get carried away, rather, and get fooled by the, you know, their own mystique, even, really. They suddenly believe that everything they do and everything they touch is right anyway, because it's us. But I've never felt that. I've always been standing back and looking at it from a different, a very objective angle. But I think I would be quite upset if the public said no more.
How important is money to you, and how important has it been to you in the past?
Well, it was very important to me in the past because I really had absolutely none, ever. And I was really very, very indescribably poor for years and years and years. So a very basic amount of money was critically important to me. But now that I have, shall we say, access to a lot of money, I'm not very materialistic. I don't own great gulps of land, and I don't own great bulks of machinery and things like that. I don't own anything, in fact, apart from a house. But I'm not materialistic in the least. I think as long as I'm quite comfortable and I don't starve to death, and I can afford to put the heating on and things like that, I have very pathetically humble requirements. I mean, most people feel that if you release a single and it gets number 29, that you instantly have uncountable amounts of money, which of course is not true. We've never earned money from singles. We've earned money from albums, but it still isn't fantastically unbelievable amount. If the Smiths ended today, in a couple of years I'd have to really start, trying to find my old CSE results and things like that.
What did you get?
Well, I got an O level in woodwork, which I'm sure one day I'll put to great use.
You and Princess Diana.
Well, I knew we had something in common.
What things frighten you?
Not really. What things frighten
You
me?
desire travel?
No, I don't desire travel, which makes things quite difficult, because obviously with most successful groups travel a lot, constantly, every day. They do world tours, things like that. The Smiths have never really, for instance, played in Europe. We've only been to certain countries once or twice to do 1 or 2 dates, but generally we haven't really touched anywhere except America.
So are you not curious about other cultures and countries that you'd like to go and have a look?
Yes, I am, but within the framework of actually being in a group, you don't really actually savour any of the countries anyway. You're just really in this tunnel of movement from one point to the next point, to a coach, to a bus, to a plane, or whatever. And you can't really absorb cultures anyway. And alarmingly, you don't really meet people.
Well then, personally, wouldn't you rather just take a few months off and go somewhere, and where would you go?
Where would I go? These are the really hard questions. Where would you go on your holidays? I don't really have any mad, insane desire to really see many countries. Not really.
Is that because you are such an insular person?
I think it is, yes. I hate flying, and I don't really like travelling that much. And I'm very insular, so that really puts the markers on that one.
Can you have a view of the world then without moving about?
Yes, but it's quite a closed view. No, we certainly have to scrap that.
What kind of perspective does one have in the world when you're not curious? I mean, are you curious about the world even though you don't want to physically go there? Do you have a curiosity what it's like to be an Amazonian Indian or someone living in Tibet, or don't you really care very much?
Well, I'm not really that curious, really. I'm not really that curious about being an Amazonian Indian at all. But that's me for you, really. It's come to the point where I think people who really care about the environment are now absolutely political. People who really care about animals. It's like to be vegetarian is practically the strongest political statement that you can make these days. And that's very interesting, because it shows, I think, the way things are moving. And suddenly all that talk about, domination and power and so on is just doesn't really feel or impress anybody.
Do you read a lot of books?
Yes, I do. I read a lot of books.
What kind of things?
Quite varied, really. I have a lot of things which I've had since I was much younger, which I still have and which I reread. And
like what, for instance? What's a one that you'd reread?
I have a lot of plays. I quite like plays. And I have a lot of feminist books and masculinist books even. And I find those things quite interesting. And it was something that once upon a time I might feel obliged to really dump on everybody. But I don't now. I really don't. For some reason it's all just passed. Not because I don't believe it, but just because I think people find it actually very boring to hear.
Can you write or act? Have you the ability?
I don't think I can act at all.
Can you write though? Could you write something that wasn't accompanying music? Could you write a novel?
Yes, Yes, I could.
Do you plan to?
Yes, I do plan to.
Are you working on it just now?
Yes.
Really?
I'm working on the cover. No, yes, I am, actually.
How far ahead is it going to take you to finish it?
A long, long time. A long, long time. But I never really felt, I never really wanted to be the type of person who does everything instantly and is seen everywhere doing lots of different, fascinating things. I think once the Smiths have ended, it will be time to think about such things, but I don't think I'd really attempt them while the Smiths were in full flow, not really, because it's very important to me to concentrate on exactly what I'm doing now and give it the fullest concentration I can think of. That's why such things as video really has never been a top priority, because I don't think I could really think about plotting videos and things like that.
Yes, no, you just don't like doing them for the Smiths, and obviously that must upset the record companies very much.
Yes.
How hard was it to make them see your point of view? And
It's very hard, and people still don't really see it. You know, after 5 years of constantly saying, but this is how I really feel, people don't accept it at all. And
why is it that you feel that you can't make videos? You won't
I don't
make
like the
them?
way people look in videos. I mean, it's really that simple. I always watch videos of groups and I think, oh, you know, they look awful. That's a shame. Why did they do that? I never see videos of groups and say, well, that's really useful. That's really flattering. Because it's always, I mean, it's a sphere where people who can't act are simply pretending that they can. And people who don't have any extraordinary talents are just really implying that they do. And they don't. I mean, simply because people make records, it doesn't mean that they have unlimited talents and resources in every possible artistic area that anybody can think of. But there is this modern assumption that pop stars or whatever have just elastic talent. It just goes on forever and it can be tugged into all areas. I don't believe that.
And don't you feel you have any talent then that would come out in video?
Not really. I mean, as I say, I don't believe I can act. And I think specifically that's what it is, really. I don't think I could really convince anybody at all. It's quite easy, I suppose, to walk through the woods and to wrap a cloak around you and jump on the back of a camel, you know, things like that. But I don't really want to stretch public credulity that much.
Do you like the medium of film? Do you like feature film?
Yes, I'm quite obsessed with feature films. I have a huge collection that I just watch and re-watch and things like that.
And so has that never tempted you to try and be part of them and be in them?
Not to be in them. Screenplays interest me very much. Dialogue interests me a great deal. But I've never been terribly interested in photography and things like that, and cameras and, you know, chemists.
Well, in Paint a Vulgar Picture, talking also about the thrill of being a young fan, one of the boys from the ugly new houses, getting a chance to touch a star. Now, you're in that position of being the star. How do you think it feels for fans to be able to get close to you?
Well, I can understand it completely, because I went through the entire experience of really, well, certainly in my case, I did worship the people that I like, the people like T-Rex and David Bowie and Roxy Music, and I went to a lot of concerts in the early 70s, 72, 73, and I would arrive really early at noon, and I would be at the stage door, and I'd wait for the coach to arrive, and just really to glimpse people stepping from the coach into the venue was something that was imprinted upon me and would never leave me. So it was a great thrill to see people close up.
Is it strange then to be the one stepping from the coach into the venue, or is it not because you understand what they're
It's not strange at all. It isn't strange at all. I can really understand it. I can.
Have you met any of your heroes now that you're in the same league in a way?
Yes, I have. I have met a few, but it's not really something now that I staunchly advise. I think it's quite nice in a way to keep the memory sealed, if you like, or the vision at least of how you see people and how you see the records they make. And also, as I get to hear anecdotes about certain records that I loved, how they were made and how awful it was and how such a person couldn't really play and they got somebody else to sing and so on, I like to cherish the memory. I like to keep it quite closed.
Do you think your fans would be disappointed if they met you?
Well, I think It's hard to gauge, but I think there is a degree of disappointment because just certain people who take music so seriously and think a great deal about the artists they like, and they have an absolute concrete vision of what this person is and what this person stands for. And sometimes you meet people and you realise that it isn't really altogether true, and you've really formed your own picture that's quite personal and it's quite useful to you, but not really necessarily in line with the reality. So sometimes, and also with me, I find that people expect it to be a certain way, and if it really isn't the way that I am, I can't really just go along with it and please them. I find I really have to interrupt and say, well, no, I don't think that at all. I'm not that way. I'm not like that or whatever. So it's quite hard to juggle with that.
Well, what kind of people are hardcore Smiths fans now then in '87?
It's quite hard to assess because initially we had an audience that was totally identifiable. In 1983, certainly, it was a specific breed, but now it really seems to have spread a little.
What was the specific breed?
I think it was a specific breed of very deep people who perhaps quite feverishly liked pop music, but really hated the chart, and really hated the press, and really hated the notion of listening to the radio. And they just disapproved, but they, in the same sense, they wanted it to mean something to them. They really wanted it in their lives. So I think they were initially they were quite deep-thinking people. People who were quite high-principled people also.
If the audience changed radically, for instance, if you started attracting screaming young girls who weren't listening to what you were playing, would you stop doing it? Would it upset you so much?
Yes, but I don't think that would happen at all, which is obviously the easy way out of that one. But when I see certain groups who have that audience who just persistently scream, and doesn't matter what the song is, let's just scream, and I find that really exhausting. It's a different world completely. Like, I went to see a-ha in America, and I really liked their records. But when I saw them, and it was just really this constant, deafening squeal, not even a respectable scream, it was actually an indecent squeal, and which completely drowned out the musicians and threw them off their tracks because they seemed totally embarrassed by all these, screaming girls. I thought, well, no, I wouldn't really like that.
Well, what kind of lifespan do you think the Smiths have just now? How long do you think it can go on?
It's hard to say. I can't answer that question at all. I just don't know.
Do you still feel very much that you have roots in Manchester?
Yes, I do feel that I have very strong roots in Manchester. And even though I'm not there every day, it's just something that I really can't get away from.
How do you cope with living somewhere like London, which is a much harder city to live in, I would imagine, than Manchester?
Well, I find it easy because I live in a nice place. I couldn't imagine living here if I didn't live in a nice place. I'd find it completely unbearable. And also, it's a horrible place to live unless you can survive financially. I would imagine it would be awful. I remember coming to London when I was 17. I moved to London as practically everybody did, and I lasted, I think it was 7 days or 8 days, but I brought everything that I possessed in these huge cases, and it was a really awful experience. So I can imagine London from that viewpoint is quite treacherous. But for me, I simply survived by really avoiding the music industry and avoiding that kerfuffle of activity, and just being quite private.
So how often do you go back to Manchester?
I go back to Manchester perhaps once a month for a weekend.
And does that recharge your batteries, or do you get something different from Manchester than you do from London?
I don't go out in Manchester either, so I don't really sense the benefits, if you like, if they be benefits of both places in that way. So being in Manchester, I just really go from one house to another, which are very mundane, but there it is nonetheless.
Well, if you don't go out to to clubs and so on? When you leave the house, where is it you want to go? What do you do for leisure pursuits outside your four walls?
I don't have any. The only time I ever leave the house is to buy food.
What goes on in your house then?
What goes on in my house? Very, very little. I mean, there's just I want to die. Very, very little. There's only generally me in there.
And what do you do?
I'm beginning to sound like a dirty old man. Well, I make lots of telephone calls to agencies in Soho. No. Right.